Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry and Company Data at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about everything that was taking place at Broadcom VMware Explore conference out in Las Vegas. And joining me to discuss that are three of the analyst team who were out there, Henry Baltazar, Jean Atelsek, and William Fellows. Welcome back to the podcast to all of you.
Great, thanks, and great to be back, Eric.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
Yep, thanks.
So there was a lot that was taking place. This was, I guess we could call it the official coming out party of VMware Cloud Foundation version 9. This was something that had been announced last year. This was clearly an expressed intent of VMware by Broadcom to be able to go put this out there. But this is the first time that we actually got a chance to see what had actually taken place on a much broader scale. There were a whole series of announcements about what was taking place. I guess we can start off with just what was your take about what you saw, what you thought was important, and what were some of the big news items that kicked up? So, William, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think the overarching theme of the event really was, as we talked about in the research, it was a sort of a coming out party for the VMware Cloud Foundation 9.0 release. So, after the acquisition, Broadcom and VMware have been, tinkering with the portfolio, integrating bits and pieces, trying to simplify the very broad and sort of complex set of offerings that it has had historically down to a much more consumable set of software and services. And so that is surfaced and packaged now as VCF9, which includes the vSphere, it includes ESXi, it includes vCloud Director. And I guess the piece that was additional at the event and really, was the kind of spear tip, I suppose, was the addition of the private AI services, which have been effectively incubated at VMware for the last couple of years, but they've now been baked in as the company has redefined its overall strategy and mission, really around trying to capture what it believes is the opportunity to land enterprises on the private cloud, and the private cloud, containing its also the ability to do all of your AI work. And although the environment still speaks to third-party environments, including the hyperscalers, there was no doubting, and CEO Hock Tan did not mince his words when he really sort of described, I think, hybrid environments for people who simply haven't found a single place to put all of their IT yet, intimating that obviously VMware is the place to do that. So that was me. That was
pretty direct there in terms of where he was headed. and I will toss into the mix, of course, NSX, the virtual networking piece, is also included in that. But this really is, the expectation is that this is a transformational motion for enterprises, that this is everything that they could possibly need, all rolled up under one umbrella, and to cover all of the pieces that they're going to do. And as you pointed out, they're now starting to layer a whole bunch of services on top of this. The data services, primarily databases, at least initially, but trying to be very public cloud-like in terms of the service offerings. and also preaching that message of, this is, cloud native capabilities and cloud native patterns are the ways that enterprises should be operating in order to become efficient. That, behind all of this is that fundamental message of you have to break the old ways, you have to go for cloud capabilities, and this is the way to do it. You do it on-prem, you do it with private cloud, you need to own it, and hey, if you need to go to cloud, well, heck, there's a VMware capability in all the major cloud providers, and you can run VMware in cloud just like you would on-prem if you have to do there. But yeah, it's...
Yeah, I'll say one message that came through pretty loud and clear to me is that VMware is trying to be more inclusive in terms of their target customer base. I think traditionally they have been very operations focused, so server admins, storage admins, network admins, and so on. And they're realizing that a lot of companies' IT organizations are evolving to be more inclusive of different venues and not just private cloud, and that to appeal to them, they need to bring on the developers and the platform teams that are architecting these environments, and not only need to bring on, but need to retain those customers.
And there were a set of things they were doing to be able to go expand that footprint. And Henry, they are adding additional storage capabilities. There are a set of net new functionality that's happening in that area as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think looking at this show compared to last show, it just really amplifies. It's still business as usual for them. Their goal is to get more of their, have more of a presence on the infrastructure side, especially on the storage elements of that. And something we'll be talking about a little bit later. One of the gaps that they had to fill for that was adding an object storage type capability to their storage stack, because the object storage not only is important for legacy workloads and for unstructured data storage, it's also the preferred type of storage mechanism for a lot of the new modern workloads. And if they want to be able to keep up with that innovation, they needed to have something there. So those type of elements are in place. But yeah, I think that it was very an interesting show for me, because we definitely felt like the literal elephant in the room, because as you're sitting there hearing, what are you doing with these architectures? You should be using everything else and it should be private cloud. Well, you also had your sponsors there that were actually have been selling with VMware for many, many years. And, those elements are resources that just can't go away. So it's going to be an interesting transition, and we'll continue to see more movement there as organizations decide what's the best path for them forward in terms of what they do with their data storage.
Yeah, well, and the interesting storage thing you're mentioning, Object Store, it's an Amazon S3 compatible storage capability. So they really are trying to look a lot like public cloud in terms of the services they offer. But I also thought some of the additional partnerships were there. Within VCF, they're now offering expanded Kubernetes capabilities. And they also announced a partnership with Canonical, so that you've now got an open source operating system that you can run your container environments on. Now, that clearly seemed to be aimed at some of the other open source providers that are out there. Red Hat, clearly, right in the middle of that, and looking to address what could have been seen as a concern around licensing of operating systems that run in your container infrastructure. But with Canonical, you'll get long-term support for your Linux operating systems and hopefully plug that gap.
Yeah, I think, Eric, that it speaks to the point that Jim was making about expanding that universe a bit more in terms of who it can enfranchise, and by constructing what's effectively a declarative model, meaning that it's a familiar way for developers to use APIs to interact with the things that they want to use and how they do things. So from that point of view, it's becoming a much more kind of standard or well-known way of doing things. But I think at the same time, it does throw into a sharper view what the role for its Tanzu application platform and development environment is going to be long term, because of course Tanzu have been supplying the Kubernetes system to vSphere, and apparently that will still continue for folks who want it. But there remains, I think, we felt a question mark now over the way forward for Tanzu, the application platform, and indeed the rich set of services that it has acquired and developed over its lifetime. And the Tanzu division operates not only the application platform, which is essentially founded on the Cloud Foundry environment that it acquired, but it also one of the other Tanzu SKUs is the Cloud Health, Cloud Cost Management environment, and the third SKU in the Tanzu, under the Tanzu umbrella, is a data intelligence layer, and this is the device which Broadcom really sees as the way to hardwire Tanzu more directly to VMware. So there's a rich set of data intelligence services which have again been incubated and developed over at Tanzu for the most part, which are now available in VCF in order to really underpin and provide the connective fabric and tissue for the private AI services.
Well, and I want to cover one thing that you mentioned just to make sure that our listeners are clear. Tanzu is now its own division. And in the Broadcom world, that's a fairly separate thing. And it was interesting to see some of the parallels of functionality. You've got in VCF, you've got data services that are starting to grow. And as you're pointing out, you've now got that full stack capability within Tanzu. You've got, it's Cloud Foundry, Spring Framework, all the rest of that really is the application, higher level platform as a service application capability. But yet there are some of the things that they're doing that are being replicated within VCF. So it sort of opens that question of which parts. Where do you get which parts? And an interesting point about at least that separation, that being part of a separate division actually starts to create.
Right. And it was clear that, I think this is something we saw pre-acquisition at VMware, is the sort of overlap and, in some cases, conflict between different business units of the company. And it ends up being a little confusing for an analyst, I'll say.
Well, and it's one of those things that there has been. One of the great things about VCF is now suddenly you've got all these different components that are now on the same release schedule. This was one of their customers' concerns. Trying to coordinate everything between all the various componentry was great, but there still are some of these divisions that remain.
Right. Yeah. And I will say also that the renaming, rebranding, which we saw so much in the pre-acquisition VMware, seems to be continuing somewhat. In other words, taking the Tanzu Kubernetes service, moving it to VCF and calling it VMware Kubernetes service, or vSphere Kubernetes service.
Uh-huh.
So, that's one thing that seems to be continuing, even though they have bundled a bunch of components together.
Well, I wonder if it's one of these we seem to be getting to a situation in which there had been something of a delineation between what was infrastructure, what was the stuff that sat below, and what were the applications and services that ran above. But now you've got a little bit of each of these starting to be sprinkled in on both sides. Because in that there's a natural move to sort of grow up the stack a little bit, provide more services and capabilities. One of the things that also got it's a part of this is that growth of what those services are that run on top of it. They've got database functionality today. The question of whether or not they add more capabilities there are more things that start to fall into the mix. But that does seem to create some of these potential duplications in terms of where you can get some of these functionalities and how high level are each of these different constituencies going to go.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, on the one hand, Broadcom really, I think, did a good job in kind of strengthening its claim to be an enterprise kind of IT landing zone in the, let's say, in the era of AI. And yet, on the other hand, speaking about Tanzu, the sort of raft and the rash of new development services for VCF seems to sort of erode the rationale for Tanzu somewhat, which again is built on some of these world-class technologies. And, we should also point out that Tanzu itself, acknowledges that fully 50% of its customers run on public cloud, whereas what we know now is that Broadcom is really anchored to the private cloud proposition, as its, core direction of travel.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned earlier, they really do want to provide all of the things that their customers are hankering for, including, in the AI world, GPUs and GPU access. I thought that it was interesting that they've expanded their GPU portfolio. So they were identifying that it's not only Blackwell and RTX families from NVIDIA. They also are looking at providing GPU virtualization. Sort of beyond that, expanding to a portfolio of connectivity. They're talking about things like Bluefield DPUs now, being able to get all of the same kinds of things and services that you potentially get in any other environment, and to do it in ways that roll all of that under the VMware vSphere umbrella. In fact, even extending GPU support out to AMD MI350s and Intel Gaudi 3 processors for all those folks who are out there running Gaudi 3, both of them, and the kinds of things that they're looking to provide to be able to do all the sort of the VMware vSphere focused capabilities. It was interesting to see they're talking about now getting close to bare metal performance through virtualization, something that they'd been a little more aggressive in that claim earlier. But again, the GPU world's a little more complex. But it does get us back to that question of where is it that people, your average enterprise actually wants to run their environments. And as we've been discussing, it does seem to be a hybrid world. Our Voice of the Enterprise data shows that enterprises really are spread across all of these environments. And I guess the consideration there is, can they and do they want to get out of a hybrid world? Do they want to go entirely private? There's certainly a few hurdles in terms of getting them there. But clearly VMware's messaging is that that's where, Broadcom or VMware Broadcom feels that they should be.
Absolutely. I guess one of the other things that we should touch on is that obviously there were some pretty disruptive changes to VMware's pricing and packaging and partnership models last year. And there are two aspects which we found particularly interesting as a consequence. Firstly, was the rise of these kind of alternative virtualization offerings from third parties who saw the disruption as an opportunity to try and grab some share from VMware, and there were quite a large number of folks who either entered the market or repackaged their own existing virtualization offerings. But our subsequent data survey into the alternative virtualization market at the beginning of the year found that actually, VMware was still way out in front in terms of the leading virtualization platform amongst enterprises. Although, all these other things at least are on the radar as potentially things that organizations could look at. So, in fact, we found that more the likely disruption to the VMware incumbency was more likely to come from all of these other things, containers, Kubernetes, and so on, rather than any change to the core virtualization proposition. And that's obviously the thing that VMware is looking to counter with the things that it did on Kubernetes and Canonical and so on. The second piece was that there was actually surprisingly little to do with the partnership model following the dissolution or the impending dissolution of the existing VMware service provider partner programs in all of their forms, and the subsequent anointing of 14 global partners who will provide sell-through services to end-user customers. There were one or two of these that we managed to connect with at the event, but it's still really early doors in terms of how they plan to actually go to market with this newly packaged environment, and indeed, how they're going to be able to, convince customers to migrate over to that and use their services. And actually, VMware itself is kind of sweetening the pot, if you like, by offering 10% of contract value to service entitlements for help in deploying VCF 9. So that's an incentive for end users, for customers to actually use these third parties to get that work done. So I think it's going to take a year to work through, and it'll be next year before we see the kind of fruits of that in any demonstrable fashion.
Because this is fundamentally a transition. Organizations need to be, if they've now got the ability to have all of this functionality, and yet in most environment or many environments, they've had a fairly heterogeneous set of capabilities. They've had a lot of different, both compute infrastructure, storage infrastructure, lots of different capabilities in various different areas, and yep, there's a whole set of wonderful new features that are all now much better integrated. But yet it's going to take time for them to move, and in some places, and especially in storage, that can be a challenge. There already are significant investments.
Yeah, I really wanted to jump in on Whiff's point earlier. I think the interesting element there is, as Whiff mentioned on the Alt-V parts and looking alternatives, there's a secret. I mean, they want to go to vSAN. Unfortunately, they have third parties and their partners who have been doing lucrative businesses with them for over a decade. And now they're in the crosshairs of replacement. So it's interesting to see how they're reacting to that as well, because, suddenly as this type of momentum started going, guess what? They're dusting off their migration capabilities now. If I look at my studies and look at what are the top pain points in storage, data migration is a top 2, top 3 issue now. So people are actively looking at where they're going to be moving their data. And these storage providers that are now trying to be replaced, or in an ideal world, be replaced by vSAN, they're not going to take that lying down. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic there in terms of where they wind up doing, in terms of, oh, you want to replace us? How about we replace you? It's going to be a very interesting dynamic, and it's not going to be it's not going to be clean in some areas. So that's going to be something we'll have to continue to watch going forward.
Very much a double-edged sword, because if, as a foundational infrastructure vendor, you already hold the keys to those capabilities, you're going to have strong motivations to maintain that connection. But yeah, interesting things. I guess we'll have to see where all of this starts to shake out. I will point our readers at the report that we've had, but I guess so much more to see as this goes on. But I guess some big steps forward in the transition so far. But I guess we'll see where this shakes out.
I should also say, Eric, just to we've come a long way since the first VMworld event in San Diego in 2004, which myself and John Abbott attended. Fast forward to today, and I don't think we could really have foreseen quite the extent to which VMware is now in place, and underpinning a great deal of the enterprise IT out there. The challenge is if it can, in the modern era, if you like, both maintain and grow that. And that's the kind of pivot point I think that we're on at the moment. So it's going to be interesting to see, over the next couple of years, whether it can demonstrate that, it can indeed achieve this.
Much more to see in that transition. Well, thank you all for being back, and a lot more to discuss as this starts to shake out. So, William, Jean, and Henry, thanks very much. But we are at time for this one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us, and thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr, Faran Mediation, Kira Smith, and Adam Kowalski in the marketing and events teams. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be looking more directly at AI infrastructure. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.